Between Life and Death by Jaclyn. Chapter 31. I dabbed at the dried, crusted blood with a wet cloth. A porcelain basin with dainty flowers painted around its lip sat on the dresser. The water inside was clean and crisp. I eyed my reflection in the mirror. My hair was a tangled mess, courtesy of robbers and riding horseback. In the low lighting of the small room, my eyes appeared less sky blue and more moon gray. It was fitting, I supposed, as I was feeling a whole buffet of emotions, up and down, and all over the place. I winced. My gaze darted from my reflection back to the deep cut in my arm. The corner of the cloth had fallen into it. Carefully, I pulled it out, not wanting to repeat the mistake. I took extra care as I cleaned the rest of it. After I was done, I dipped the cloth in the water, my blood tinging it red. It took about an hour for us to get to the city. Weary-boned and wide-eyed decapitation first-timer here. I turned in for the night as soon as Jaclyn had paid for our rooms at the inn. The quarters were small but cozy. A single bed pressed against the wall. A chest at the end full of extra quilts, all of them hand-stitched. A hearth, matching the size of the room, crackled. The fire inside well stoked. It scented the room in the sweet smells of burning birch, and bathed the walls in a flickering, honey glow. I closed my eyes. For a moment, it was almost like I was back at the cottage. I waited to hear the shuffle of feet in the kitchen, waited to hear the chopping of wood outside, but no such sounds came. Only the muffled thrum of laughter and music drifted from below, through the thick, wooden floorboards. The laughter reminded me of my new extended family of cracker sandwiches and sibling rivalry, and bourbon. But just like Ezra and Caleb, they were not here. There was no Harper, no Riker, no Lyra, no Soren, no Vaughn. I didn't know why, but all of it was hitting me hard. Maybe it was the loss of my old world, of the simplicity, of how things used to be. Maybe it was the building pressure I felt to get Caleb home. Or maybe it was everything that happened tonight. Maybe it was all of those things. A single tear slid down my cheek. I brushed it away with the back of my hand, fighting to rein in the rest. Something tapped on the window. The sound reminding me of a chicken pecking the ground. It sounded bird-like. I rose from the worn stool, deflated and flat from too many years of use, and walked over to the window. My fingers did a poor job of convincing the brass latch to open. It was stiff, like it hadn't been used for quite some time. Adding a bit more pressure, finally, the latch complied. My hands went to the wooden handles on the window and opened them inward, into my room. Fresh air filled my lungs, scented with the distant smell of rain. There, on the lip of the weathered sill, a black feather teetered in the lullaby of the gentle wind. I took it, cradled it in my hands. Its color was like the blackest of nights, dusted with a shimmer that twinkled like stars. It was just like the others, magical, ethereal. How could such a lovely thing belong in my world? Perhaps it didn't. Remember, the word echoed, carried in on a phantom thought. Closing my eyes, I leaned into its command, following it like a child would a mother. It took me to the part of my mind that I had never been able to connect with. It was like a vast canyon, where you could yell, and yell, and yell, but nothing would ever reply. That part of me had always been vacant, a house without fixtures, furniture, or inhabitants. It was my void, lifeless and empty, my very own endless mist. There came a loud knock at the door. Jaclyn's voice called from the other side. I brought you something to eat. Although the feather looked delicate, it was far from it. It was sturdy, strong, impossible to break. Still, I carefully placed the feather in my bodice before I walked to the door. My gait was a bit slow, Jaclyn's presence determining my pace more than anything. Now that he knew I was cursed, considering who he served, that could not be a good thing. Using my unwounded arm, I opened the door and stepped back, allowing Jaclyn enough berth to walk inside. Like Between Life and Death, Vaughn, he didn't just take up space, he dominated it. I was reminded of the first time I saw him, of all those men surrounding him in the pool at the bathhouse, their serpent bellies up, basking in his light. Jaclyn slid the wooden tray on the end table, effectively pushing a few books to the side while he did it. He wore a long gray coat that looked brand new, and like the rest of his clothing, it was perfectly tailored. The coat was unbuttoned, exposing a crisp white tunic beneath. His red hair was slicked back, still wet. Any evidence of what happened earlier was now washed away. He glanced briefly at the window, the sheer drapes gently mussed by the wind, and then to me. One brow shot up. Is it not counterproductive to have the fire going, and the window open? That curious brow of his seemed to ask, why is it open? But I did not feel like talking to him about the feather. Besides, he sniffed out lies like a hound searching for an egg in a hen house. so making something up was pointless. Instead, I evaded the subject. You can close it. I gestured to his coat, shifting the conversation, just as I had done with Ezra 500,000 times. A bit much for being inside. No. Why are you wearing a coat? I had to go outside. He flipped one side open, searching for something. There is an apothecary just down the street. He produced a small wooden box from an inside pocket and placed it on the end table beside the tray. For your wound. Thanks, I replied, my senses somewhat occupied. The smell of carrots, potatoes, and some type of meat wafted towards me. I sauntered over to the tray, my mouth watering, when I saw the bowl of steaming stew, and the golden bun sitting beside it. A dollop of half-melted butter glistening on the delectably brown top. A silver goblet filled with something red, wine, I presumed sat just to the left. I plopped onto the bed, and slid the tray onto my lap, oh so ready to dig in. But just before I took a bite, I paused. It's not poisoned, if that's what you are thinking. You are of no use to me dead, Arkin said as he swung the window closed. Arkin's last statement did not bode well with me as I had no desire to be of any use to him. In any shape or form. I could ask him what he meant, but this seemed like one of those moments where it was better to let sleeping dogs lie. My stomach grumbled, urging me to eat. I was a slave to food. So naturally, I complied. Savory broth greeted my tongue. I chewed the diced potato, a subtly sweet taste. When I got to a piece of meat, I melted. Beef. My toes curled. This was better than sex. Arkin removed his coat and placed it on the small wooden chair in the far corner of the room. He sat beside me, the bed dipping under his weight. Silence drifted between us as I devoured my supper, my taste buds humming with each bite. When I got to the bottom of the once heaping bowl, my stomach near bursting, I debated if I could polish off the last of it, but, like I said, slave to food. So I scooped it up, and inhaled that too. I debated smooshing my finger against the remaining crumbs, and eating them as well, but I refrained for Arkin's sake, not mine. Some things never change, Arkin chided under his breath, his shoulders bowed in ease. What? I asked, returning the tray to the end table, my attention still somewhat occupied. Nothing, Arkin replied with a soft shake of his head. I didn't need to turn and look to feel his gaze drift over me. I had spent enough time with men to know what such looks meant, and I knew if I turned, if I connected our gazes, it could lead to something more. Arkin was handsome, yes, divinely so, but it was who he served that bothered me. Quite simply, he was not Vaughn. Between life and death, eh? So, I stared at the coin-sized knot in the wooden floor, just beside my right foot, and let the moment pass. Your arm needs stitches, Arkin finally said, his voice rougher than usual, like a foxtail barb was stuck in his throat. I knew it did. I had seen cuts half as deep that Ezra stitched up before. I leaned to the side and plucked the wine cup from the table, inspecting the few sips still left inside. Now I knew why he brought it. I chugged the bitter tasting wine and said, well, let's get it over with. Arkin nodded, his long arm stretching over top of me, reaching for the wood box. I could feel his heat caress my skin. A knock at a door that was closed to him. I leaned back, granting him more room and myself some needed space. After he cleaned my wound, the alcohol chewing into my sore flesh, he sanitized the needle and scissors over top of the wash basin. He popped the cork back on the little brown bottle, the disinfectant, turning around with the suture in between life and death, instruments on a white cloth. He brought them over to me. I spared a withered glance at the gaping flesh, and then what it was about to be met with, and took a deep breath, wishing for another glass of bitter wine. Arkin rolled up his sleeves, and then he went to work. His strong fingers plunged the needle through my tattered flesh as he pulled the thread through, putting it back together. The first stitch wasn't so bad, but it was the next one that had me ready to howl. I gritted my teeth and held it in. I decided that whoever dreamt of using stitches to sew up a wound was a sick bastard. I was a human, not a damn quilt, as if it weren't already sore enough. Truth be told, I was a bit of a baby when it came to stitches. I had Ezra to blame for that. Caleb and I were both accident-prone children. So Ezra developed a salve that allowed the skin to stitch itself back together. I still remember watching it as it worked. She would dab it on, and we would watch in awe as the skin started to generate little threads that would weave together and close any flesh wounds. It was marvelous stuff. Well, besides the fact it would cause the skin to keep growing little thread like hairs for the next week or so. Otherwise, amazing stuff. I would take that side effect over stitches. I yelled like a cat that just had its tail lopped off as the needle sunk in. It was loud enough for the patrons downstairs to hear. Loud enough for the whole city to hear. Probably not. It wasn't that loud. Like I said, a big baby. Almost done, Arkin said reassuringly, his fingers coated with my blood. I nodded somberly, swallowed hard, and waited for it to be over with. It was taking longer than I had hoped, but my pain receptors were beginning to dull down, my shrieking more like a baby's just waking up cry now. I turned to Arkin, looking for a distraction. You once spoke of a girl with hair similar to mine. What was her name? Between life and death, eh? He stopped abruptly, as if the mention of her triggered an old memory. Continuing, he said, Aurelia? Aurelia. I tested the name on my tongue, pausing to wince when he finished another stitch. It is a beautiful name. As was she, he said, his gaze lifting to mine. As are you. I didn't know if it was the wine, or the fire, or the honey in those brown eyes, but my cheeks heated. I looked away. Damn it, it was the wine. I was more of a broody male with obsidian eyes kind of woman. After the stitches were finished, Arkin caught the housemaid in the hallway, and asked her to bring another pitcher of water. While we waited for her, he emptied the wash basin, and dropped the bloody needle and scissors inside. With his back turned to me, he said, the tattoo on your arm. I do not recall seeing it before. Is it new? Instinctively, at the mention of the tattoo, I looked at it. It is, I said, not sure where this topic was going. Why did you get it? He asked, turning to me. A thin cloth was slung over his shoulder, a light dusting of bloody fingerprints faintly visible on it. I traced the vine as I answered his question, half mumbling to myself. Same reason I'm here with you. I regretted it as soon as I said it because his eyes narrowed and the room fell stagnant, lukewarm at best. Who did you make a deal with? He asked, calculating things faster than I thought possible. I was reminded of his age, and that he was the one trusted to advise the king. Of course he could map out things faster than most. My brain tossed the question over, inspecting it for sinkholes. I decided there were plenty. I don't think that's any of your business. Arkin slung the towel down on the floor, opening his mouth to speak. He was cut off by a knock at the door. Arkin offered me a withering stare before he walked over and opened it, revealing a buxom maid. She looked up at him and batted her eyelashes, her chest thrust up suggestively. Immune, he offered her a dashing smile, took the pitcher, gave her a, that will be all, and closed the door swiftly. He walked over to the basin, dumped the fresh water in, and continued to clean, vigorously, intensely. I was starting to feel sorry for the scissors. At that rate, all that would be left of them were nubs. Do you want me to do that? I asked, feeling every bit of his soured mood dampening the air. No, he said firmly. His voice was not unkind, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. After he was finished, Arkin stood at the door. He opened his mouth but then closed it. Whatever it was he wanted to say was snuffed out as he turned and shut the door behind him. The sound of his boot heels faded as he walked down the length of the hallway, until the sound of them was completely gone. I flopped onto the bed, my one foot on the floor, the other stretched out before me, my head swarming with what just happened. Why did he react like that? I sighed, giving up the question to the gods, and pulled the feather from my bodice. Tell me your secrets, I whispered as I studied its silky, black plumes, but the feather did not answer. So I turned to my dreams instead. One push. That was all it took. Down, down, down. I was but a leaf destined to never hit the ground, forever falling. Down, down, down. A rustle of feathers. I was saved.